Stay right there. What are you waiting for? Kill them! Kill them both! No, wait a minute. Is it money you're after? I'll give you as much as you want.
May the saints forgive you, because I won't.
Brad Kelly, I don't even know really how to start. I was probably reserved a little bit before I hit record, and then now I guess the adrenaline is hitting me. But thank you so much for coming on, number one. And
thanks for having me, man. This is an honor. I love what you're doing. I listen to Threshold Saints pretty regularly, man. So
awesome.
You've had a lot of my friends on, and my favorite internet people. So this is a treat.
Well, thank you so much for saying that, Brad, first of all. And I guess I said first of all already. So, but I have to say, secondly, that you did hook me up with Andrew Edwards. So that was like a pretty big deal interview for me. So thank you again for that. And cool. I think it was really generative in the sense that I could explore metaphysical ideas with someone who isn't necessarily like explicitly a metaphysician. So I think people could hear me do a little K-ball, as I like to call it, off the cuff. So thank you again, Brad.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And please, of course, you're a veteran podcaster, you're a sci-fi writer. We'll talk about that after, and you have a really incredible project with ApCon coming up. So please plug everything that you're up to, want to plug, and introduce yourself in the ways that you want to.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Brad Kelly, primarily fiction writer, podcaster as well. I have a novel out, The Earthen Dark. It's a work of blue-collar cosmic horror. People seem to like it. You can check that out. I have a podcast called Method and Madness. It's primarily a podcast about books. There's episodes focused on specific books. There's conversations with mostly writers, kind of informal conversations where they promo stuff and I ask questions. There's also, I'm doing kind of an audiobook series of public domain short stories, kind of all over the map in terms of style and genre and that sort of thing. There's so much in the public domain that is ripe for, I almost said exploitation, but for revivification, I should say. And then Method and Madness, I also do sort of deep dive scripted solo episodes in which I explore a variety of rabbit holes associated with a great work of fiction. And then I also, I'm a pretty devoted student of the tarot, and I've been trying to share that more and more and do readings for more and more people. I write about a bit on the tarot as well. And then, as you mentioned, coming up very soon, to celebrate the 250th anniversary of the founding of the United States of America, the great literary magazine, one of the coolest literary magazines running at the moment, actually one of maybe the coolest, Apocalypse Confidential, has asked me to join them for a special that they're calling American Bestiary. So I'm the guest editor on that. And it's, I mean, you really have to read the description to get a sense of what this is really about. For those who don't know, I mean, Apocalypse Confidential always does these just completely idiosyncratic and awesome special theme issues, themes that are both themes you've never seen before in a literary magazine, but are also loose enough to capture a lot of different kind of stuff. And this is folklore belongs here, neo-folklore, American conspiracy, cryptids, the whole American weird is going to belong in this issue. So if you've got something that you think would be cool, get that in. I think June 14th is, I believe, the deadline to get that in for publication on July 4th. So check that out. It's going to be great.
Well, I'm excited for that. It's going to be every, personal outlet that I follow. They're all saying they're throwing their hat in. To use
I
the
know,
quote.
it's very cool.
It's a little scary, but like it's awesome at the same time. So I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
But let's talk about. I said sci-fi, so we'll start with that. I love I love a wordplay. It's very chaos magic. I know.
Yes.
I'm not saying that Brad is or isn't. I'm not. But I'm saying yes, a little, magic of the letters, Ars Notoria. So
absolutely.
What does sci-fi in your sort of framing or spelling, what does it mean for you, and does it have greater genre implication?
Yes. Yeah, so sci-fi and specifically, I partially picked this genre signifier because it sounds exactly the same as sci-fi that we relate to science fiction, and automatically brings up illusions about speculative fiction more generally. And to me, PSY, this relates to psyche, psychedelic, psychological, all of the things that we use that sort of root word for. And in one sense, I kind of applied this to myself, a sci-fi writer. In anybody out there who's listening to this as a writer, that you're looking for ways to distinguish yourself from other writers in a meaningful way, right? Ways to kind of capture what you think is maybe unique about what you do, what maybe differentiates what you do from what other people do. I wouldn't claim to be the first sci-fi writer ever, but fundamentally, the way that I sort of think about this is science fiction, for example, plays on sort of what if scenarios in the scientific or sort of physics realm, right? It's science fiction is it's almost like a warped rational genre. Science fiction as we know it, space operas, etc., right? It's everything makes sense within the logic of its own world, but it's based on some fundamental what if scenario. What if there was a desert planet 2,000 years from now? What if, and it was lived in by what are they, Zen Sunnis, right? What if there was what if there were lifelike androids that had been enslaved and moved to another planet, and some of them had snuck back to your Earth, right? I take that sort of basic core what if concept, and my sort of thinking is like, well, let's just like put that in the human mind, and pose sort of what if propositions about the nature of psychology, the nature of the way the human mind works, and ultimately, because the operation of the human mind and reality itself are indistinguishable, you end up asking yourself questions about what is reality. So that's fundamentally what I think of as sci-fi, PSY. And I've written 2 novels so far and a gang of short stories that I would say fall under that. And probably everything I do from here on out will in some ways fall under that banner. So
well, I always say this is a speculative show, speculative ontology. So Metafiction was like my first real foray into the intersection of writing and magic, really. And that and so I exactly what you're saying makes complete sense to me, as well as it makes metaphysical sense, because all reality is kind of speculative. It depends on, how much materiality we can grasp of it. So
yeah, for sure. And there's always, whatever you think about what the ultimate nature of reality may or may not be, and I think to some extent it's actually unknowable. We are interacting with it through sort of the interface of at the very least our nervous system. So even in like a strictly scientific rationalist materialist way, which is not something that I consider myself, but even under that sort of paradigm, we're still living in this strange, ineffable, isolated individual reality in a sense, right? We're not actually, we don't actually make contact with the real world in a physical sense. We're interacting with an interface that's being presented in our mind. So all bets are off in my understanding in terms of like what reality really is. And I think story and narrative is an excellent place to play to play with those questions.
I mean, I agree, because that is the container for what reality can be and what reality also maybe is. Obviously, it's all speculative, as I was saying, but I'm a hyperspace kingdom guy. Like, I'm unapologetic. If people want to call it like panpsychic universe, like that's not my language. Or Buddhist multiverse, I'm very comfortable with that. But I am. So I do agree that there are multiple ways to frame what is the truth, and there's no real way to articulate it in words. I can make a long cable argument about why that is, but I won't do that. But I do want to talk to you a little bit about your book, Brad, and then we can move to tarot after that, because I think that is one of the most important sort of tools for Western. Anyways, we'll get into that when we get into that. But I want to talk to you about your book, because instantly, and I know you know this, there are kind of allusions to this tunnels of Set. I think you've said it before, even on recording, so that's not me being clever original. But I do feel like there is a Typhonian, maybe not like explicitly Typhonian, but like as you said, Lovecraftian, and all those guys love there's a specific group of them, they really love Lovecraft materials. I'm more of a I've said it many times, I'm more of a Conan enjoyer myself, but I am getting familiar with Lovecraft and some of those ideas as well. So I want you to talk about what are the connections for you between sort of that material and sort of like if does it have metaphysical implications? Is like your book like just is it kind of like Kenneth Grantian, Kenny G, as some people say?
Kenny G, I like that.
One of my co-hosts says he calls me Kenny G, and so really was funny. It like a Kenny G remix? Is it like something like that, or is it like more of a? I know you've referred to it as serious fiction, and you are a serious writer, and I would never frame it that you weren't, but I'm just you explain it. I think you get it.
I think I know where you're sort of steering this. There is so the Earthen Dark is the setup, and this is highly intentional, starts off in incredibly terrestrial terms, right? The first, other than a couple little oddities that are begin to trickle in, the first couple moves of the book are very much in the quote unquote real world, and almost in like an overly real world in a sense. We have this character who's a disgraced academic, specialty of anthropology, in the pursuit of money, and not wealth necessarily, but just getting by kind of money to support his family. He ends up working a very blue collar, hardcore kind of hands-on job down repairing sewers. And in the sewers, he and his workmates effectively step through a portal. And on the other side of that, it becomes, for them, there is intense ontological shock, because the rules are very difficult for them to grasp from their own perspective, and hopefully at times, occasionally, in a pleasurable, delightful way, are difficult for even the reader to grasp this new terrain that we're in. They're in something like a multiversal airlock, in which every time they try to exit the sewer, they're in a different version of reality. And partially that does play into this notion we were just talking about a little bit ago, in which the reality that you actually live in is something that's being rendered out of an infinite number of facts or contact points with reality and being rendered into something habitable for you as an individual. So it has something to do with that, but there's also the notion at play in what worlds they sort of go up into, what planes of existence they go up into that have to do with their own preconceived notions, their own desires, their own limitations, and in some way they're in relationship to some kind of thing that's down there with them. They are somehow guiding these realities that they step off into. And for me, this is a sort of a metaphoric exaggeration of how I see the world, in that I think, and the magicians, Kenny G among them, would, I think, agree, at least on this point, that your focus, your attention, and your intention define quite a bit about the reality that you inhabit, perhaps more than is even comfortable to admit at times. And so a lot of the book is our main character, Jim, who's a pretty flawed guy, kind of having to sort through his own, flaws and limitations, admit to his own desires, in order to sort of steer his own ship of consciousness back home, I guess, if home and if home still means something by the end of the book. So yeah, there is like a metaphysical core, I don't know if I even want to say belief, kind of quandary that I live through that's operating in the book, and it's given a lot of aesthetic and narrative efflorescence to make it fun, hopefully a sort of compelling and even at times fun read, though I do realize it gets kind of heavy and dark and scary at times. But I mean, who doesn't like to be a little scared sometimes?
It's good for us. It's good for us to,
I think so.
Darkness and the Qlippoths. I totally agree. I mean, that's the truth.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that was incredibly fascinating. Even the way you described it is exactly how I would describe sort of studying the Sephira or studying the Qlippoth. I mean, I'm more of a Sephirotic studier, enjoyer myself, simply because I think you encounter the shells or the husks with any study of the Sephira because of your own preconceptions, just like you said.
Yes,
your reality is altered by your own mind. So I totally agree with that. So I don't want to make any presumptions, Brad, but how would you sort of define your orientation to esoterica or or greater reality? Like, how do you see it? Do you have any inspirations? Would you identify as anything in particular, or do you have more of an open-ended approach to, you're more flexible when it comes to that?
Yeah, I'm pretty open-ended, and and this isn't just to short circuit the response to that question, but it's honestly it's related, I think, to, and it's taken me a long time to realize this, but I think it's actually related to the vocation that I have as specifically a writer of fiction, because effectively the writing of fiction it's some kind of like deep, highly technical language magic, basically, that you're doing, symbol magic. And if you think about it in that way too much, you'll often stumble over yourself, to be honest, but that is kind of what you're doing. And so I tend to be, perhaps to my own detriment, I tend to be fairly a la carte about my sort of like metaphysical preconceptions, because when I sort of see all of the systems being as these as being somewhat incomplete or imperfect attempts at at getting to the thing, right? I don't know if I would say like, oh, they're all of them are saying the exact same thing, but there seems to be a lot of efforts in many, many different directions, using different languages, different mythological systems, different honestly, like personality types of the people who devised these systems of belief. And I think I have been sort of surfing between a lot of them, and so I've picked up a lot of elements that I find valuable from all kinds of things. I find Catholicism valuable in a lot of ways. I find the tarot incredibly valuable. I find aspects of Buddhism, though I'm not particularly well schooled there, I find that valuable. I find ayahuasca, South American ayahuasca mysticism incredibly valuable. I find Jungian depth psychology very valuable. I'm very much a neophyte in the Kabbalah, but the stuff I come across in there, I find that to be valuable as a system to try to get insight into things. And so I'm really probably a dilettante for the most part, just because I'm kind of schizophrenic and all over the place with it. And perhaps one day I will, I'll just settle down and I'll just go to the nearby Catholic church. Maybe that's coming 10, 20, 30 years down the road. I don't know. But in the meantime, and part of this, I think, just comes from a genuine fascination, with different systems of belief, with different takes on what the hell this thing is that we're all experiencing, both collectively and individually. And so if I were to say that the Bible is a novel, to me that doesn't demean it whatsoever, and I hope not to offend any of my Christian friends by saying that. To me, that makes it almost more interesting. It's like, look at what a text can do. Its contact with like hard tack provable reality, I don't even know how I would verify that. What I know is there's useful stuff in there. What I know is there's psychedelic, and by that I just mean mind-opening stuff in there. And there are things in there which, if paid attention to and followed and integrated, you can have, I think, moments of something like gnosis. And so I think ultimately, I don't even know if I've stated this to myself before, but I'm kind of rambling my way to it. I think what I have been looking for are different approaches, different pathways to gnosis, is I think what I've been hunting my whole adult life, and I've managed to find a handful of them that work for me.
I mean, I agree with you, Brad. Like, I think that to have like a multifaceted approach is really healthy, really good at first, and then you can, you, as I would say, or as Tantra would say, like we winnow the husks, right? Or that's even a Kabbalistic thing. And I would argue that actually you do know Kabbalah because obviously the Golden Dawn really heavily pushes the association of tarot with the Kabbalah, which I think is actually like a very good, in general, way to look at the tree. Now, I don't know tarot. That's what's really interesting, and I even brought this up to you. Like, I don't know tarot like barely at all, but I am good at Kabbalah. So there can be something interesting in synthesis. But I also agree with you that the hermeneutics that exist, like, obviously I'm a Buddhist and I do follow Dharma and I'm very sincere about that, but I also like am very clear, like I'm also like I do practice Tantra and I do believe in magic and I do understand magic to an intermediate degree, I would say, and other metaphysics in general, like especially quote unquote Asian, whatever that even is. But yeah, I agree that there's a lot of, especially for the American mind and like the modern mind, I think that there's no perfect one single vehicle. I think that there is exactly like what you said. Everything's a narrative container. And so, like, it's like, what do people want to believe? What do they choose? I know your character, Jim, it's like very much I want to say like a little bit younger's anarch, like a little, he's very agential in a way, like, because you have to face your darkness if you're really your own agent of being, right? Because if you don't know that part of yourself, how can then you say, this is my will, or this is who I am?
Right. And how do you know it's not just that thing that appears to you as a will isn't just an illusion that's been sort of programmed by societal conditioning or whatever, right? Like You know what I mean? Like, I believe in that in such a thing as free will, but I don't always know that the thing we identify it is actually it, if that makes sense. You know, I think
Absolutely.
I think we sometimes fall for the deception that what we think is our will, and oftentimes it's not. And you know, it's partially about trying to find the way, hopefully underneath it, and hopefully there's something there. Yeah.
I mean, I totally agree with you, obviously, because that's a Kabbalistic truth, is that you have to reveal the sheath or reveal the husk to see what's
Mm-hmm.
underneath, right? So,
Mm-hmm.
that it metaphysically makes sense. So
Yeah.
I totally
Yeah.
agree.
And I found myself, especially like as time goes on, I've actually found myself sort of more drawn, maybe drawn isn't the right word, in terms of the sort of the unsheathing, winnowing the husks. It's like, I found that a lot of what is presented to you as an individual to do that is oftentimes it's sort of presented to you as the easy route, like doing this thing the easy or the gentle way. And I've had better luck with a little bit more tough love, if I could say. I guess what I'm saying is sort of like there's a kind of a message in like modern psychotherapy kind of speak, which I think there is value there, but there's a sort of message of like, oh, it's just about like loving yourself or something. And maybe that does work at some point, but like um I need to get like punched in the gut first. And so I think in hindsight, a lot of the routes that I've sort of chosen to develop my spiritual awareness have often been, uh, uh, they've often been more like combat than than getting a big hug from the guy, from the man in the sky, if that makes sense. Like not that tarot is necessarily does that to you. It can, but you know, I see the process of writing a novel is in part, and I know this probably sounds pretentious, but to people, some people who are listening, but like I see the process of writing a novel. I like writing the novels primarily because, and when I say primarily, I mean as opposed to short stuff and essays and things like that, which those are perfectly valid. But for me personally, I like writing a novel because it takes a long time and it's really hard, and it forces me to be something. It forces me to be something more than I am when I start it in order to finish it. And so I think I look for those kinds of routes, those sorts of routes to gnosis. And maybe one day I'll be able to be a little bit gentler on myself, but I don't know if I'll be as productive a writer if that happens. So we'll see.
This is what's interesting about what you're saying and what you even said before about gnosis, because that really is the truth of Buddhism, is like, all the different yanas, all the different kinds of Buddhism, like the tantric kind that I do, which is like very magical, very sorcerous.
Mm.
It's all really to get to that place, that secret place. Like, if you want to be very Kenny G about it, it's just to get to death. And so,
Yeah.
what do you do when you're there? That's the big question, I
Mm.
think, in all metaphysics. Like, what do you do when you're at non-dual gnosis? Do you draw from that? Do you draw from like the speculative wisdom outside of
Mm.
time? Do you draw from the sort of embodied corpus or the canon that exists, that like that deep Bina understanding?
Yeah.
It's like what's the real question is like, where do you go? What do you want to do with it? So I'm not, although that isn't not necessarily my approach, like to do the
Mhm.
hardest route.
Yeah.
I do
Yeah.
understand that from a tantric perspective, it's very useful to sort of become the what we call the Virasic figure, like the salted hero, someone who
Mhm.
is so experientially sort of accustomed to the hard things in life that they are more apt to follow more difficult hermeneutics. So
Mhm.
they need the sort of like the difficulty to sort of not cleanse them is the wrong word, but maybe clarify is a better word. Clarify the aggregates of understanding that they already have.
Yeah, yeah, I like that, and I think part of this comes from part of the differentiation in sort of the route that's going to be best for people. I think is it is a sort of an individual difference to a certain degree. I mean, uh, I'm not an astrological expert by any means. I know a fair amount about it, but like the one thing I do know is that I am absolutely a fire sign, and so that's about like so I need to burn. You know what I mean? Like, and I mean that in a positive and a negative sense, right? A lot of my development as a sort of person in the terrestrial plane has been like figuring out how to make that fire generative rather than just destructive. Because I think there's a in the Earthen Dark world, there's a different Brad Kelly out there who is metaphorically speaking some kind of arsonist, is just and is bent on some kind of destruction, whether self or others. And that sort of energy, I've managed to turn that almost entirely generative, but it hasn't been easy. And I think I need the hard thing to focus that energy, if that makes sense. Otherwise, I'm just burning the whole thing down. You know what I mean?
I
So,
relate to this
yeah.
like very, very closely because I'm also a
Yeah.
fire sign. I
Mhm.
identify very strongly with that fire sign, as well as like I embody a lot of those qualities, as well as like the impulsive, very destructive nature. But it's not necessarily my nature to destroy or to hurt things or people. But I definitely, it's hard for me to contain it. I think that's what you're talking about. Like there's
Yes.
like frenetic kind of like energy that's always going, whether it's in
Yes.
your mind or like, like more active. So I
Yeah.
agree, like it really takes a lot of will, a lot of self-cultivation. And it's not, I've also have found it difficult. But of
Yeah.
course, like, I think this is true for a lot of people. And I think that unfortunately, I do think it's like when the older you become, like I noticed for me, the older I've become, the more tempered I've become. That doesn't mean it's
Yes.
become easier. It just means that I am more naturally, I can be a little bit more at peace.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And you find ways. I mean, you find ways over time to live with it, And I'm a very peaceful person now. You know what I mean? Life is actually, for the most part, pretty chill. That's because I've sort of routinized so much of things, right? I've taken all the freneticism and like figured out like, all right, how do you capture that lightning in a jar? Well, it actually weirdly for me looks like a pretty boring day. But it's all been sort of channeled. All that energy has been put in its appropriate slots, so I can just I can render that stuff down into something useful. And that's come from like, writing taught me that, because trying to write a novel requires this like daily practice and attention, and a certain pace that you keep. And other things have sort of done that for me too. I made reference to ayahuasca mysticism, and working with that stuff is like, I mean, sometimes it's beautiful and super peaceful and it's all love, and then other times it's combat for your sanity. And I needed to go through that as well. So, I've had more than once I've absolutely lost my mind for a few hours, and weirdly enough, I think it made me more sane on the other side of it.
This makes complete sense to me as well. Like, just
Mhm.
I'm not saying necessarily psychedelics or ayahuasca,
Mhm.
but
Yeah, it's
even
not
in
for everybody.
it's not for everybody.
Yeah.
I honestly, I smoke a lot of weed. I will take mushrooms on occasion. I have done San Pedro several times. I've never done ayahuasca, but I've done a North American analogs.
Mm.
And so I've experimented. I'm very comfortable with it. But what I mean by similar is that even in like more regular tantric Buddhist kind of sadhana, there are two ways to really understand the mind. One is as the carnal ground, so like the places where bodies are cremated, and you actually do all this visualization where you sort of construct the mind palace or whatever you want to call that in the physical carnal ground. And then there's another one where
Mm.
it's called royal palace cultivation. So all those corpses and like all the wrathful things of the carnal ground, they transform into things like jewels and flowers. And then there's a place
Yeah.
where you actually bring those two things together and you kind of recognize like actually this is all just the nature of mind. So
Yeah,
I
yeah,
I
yeah. I
totally I
love, yeah, I love that. No, I need. I probably. I would be interested in taking some steps in the direction of that sort of practice. That sounds really interesting to me for sure.
okay, awesome. Well, we can
Yeah,
definitely discuss
I
that
might.
one day.
Yeah, I might be up for that for sure.
Yeah, no, I mean,
Yeah.
it's I mean, everything you say, Brad, is like very metaphysically rich. I always find it when I listen to the show,
Well,
and
thanks, man.
obviously tarot, of course. And of course, like tarot is very metaphysically rich. And as I said, I'm just a very junior student at it, not even a junior student, just like a
Yeah.
total neophyte. Like that doesn't I am familiar with it. I owned a Toth deck
Mhm.
since I was like 14. I guess that's a good question to ask you. Okay,
Yeah.
so tell your tarot story, Brad, like when you
Yeah.
first got into it, your first
Sure.
deck, what you love about it, etc., etc.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Let's get into it. So yeah, I first got into tarot over 10 years ago now. Well, geez, almost coming on 15 years ago. I had I went on a date with a young woman. We dated for a little while, but doesn't really matter. She had a tarot deck. I saw it in her purse, and I didn't know anything about it. I'd never had a tarot reading. I knew vaguely what, it was like gypsies reading fortunes, right? But she had it, and first date, you're always kind of looking for what can we sort of talk about. Let's get to know each other. And she gave me a reading, and by the end of it, I was having like a fairly profound emotional reaction to the reading, and uh and I was a much more, I don't know if I would still have like classified myself as an atheist at that point, but I was much more rational minded. Like much more, I was much more in the domain of swords back in those days. And so to me, it was like, this is BS, this is BS, this is BS. Wait, why am I crying? Right, like, and so I sort of, from then on, I kind of had to know what this was. And her and I, she kind of gave me sort of the 101, so I started to get a sense of it, but then I kind of went off on my own and really, really, cracked open a lot of books and spent a lot of time just meditating on cards, reading different sources, giving practice readings. I would for a long time I would basically, I would conjure in my mind somebody that I knew well, and I would give them a reading just to like practice, basically. And I did that and I would read pretty extensively and do a daily card meditation, et cetera, until I was finally ready. I felt like to give a stranger a reading. And then I was living in Denver at the time, and I started giving strangers readings at coffee shops and bars, and it seemed like it went really, really well. And I just got deeper and deeper into it. And it's interesting. It's like anything else. You can learn a lot about learn a lot about it by reading the history, by reading sort of theory, I guess you would call it. But then there's a whole nother layer that comes from actually the practice of conducting a reading for somebody. And so there's a handful of things sort of worth thinking about. There's, on the one layer, there's a very sort of scholastic approach to the whole thing. And the cards have defined but somewhat flexible meanings that have been sort of rendered and distilled over, at this point, a couple centuries. Tarot wasn't really used for divination until like the 1700s, probably maybe the late 1600s. It had been just a card game up until then. But in that intervening years, there's been a lot of discourse and sort of figuring out what these things mean by people, and it's good to become really familiar with those. um, I I played around with several different decks, but I ended up focusing on the deck that I started with, which is the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. It's sort of the I would say it's the most influential deck, just because most of the modern, by modern I mean sort of contemporary deck interpretations you see, new decks that people come up with, are usually directly influenced by the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. I think it's valuable because it was developed by a guy, A.E. Waite, who was very schooled in Christianity and in the Kabbalah, and it was co-developed with Pamela Coleman Smith, who, in my mind, was a literal visionary. And so that alchemical relationship between the two of them, I think, produced something that actually has some magic baked into it, for lack of a better word. I think they knew exactly what they were doing. And so anyway, there's knowing the individual card meanings, there's knowing the suit meanings, there's knowing the structure of the court and what that means regardless of suit, and then how that's refined through each suit. And then there's becoming intimate with what's called the Fool's Journey, which is those cards that are comprised by sort of the more iconic cards like Death or the Hanged Man or the Burning Tower, or you know, those sort of more famous cards. Knowing that Fool's Journey, knowing a sense of how that operates in your life and narratively. And then you take all of that, and then there's the actual conducting or reading for yourself or other people. And that's where you have to sort of tap into an intuitive layer. And that's where that kind of magic occurs, because the cards become randomized and you're drawing relations between them, and you're effectively trying to tell a story based on these random elements that, though they've been randomized, individually they have deep meanings that have been hardened. Shouldn't say hardened, they've been tempered and refined over several centuries of thought and practice. So it's really cool to me. It appeals to me a lot because it has this scholastic study element, but then it also has this vibe element. And you sort of are marrying the two of them in to my mind, in an ideal practice, you're marrying the two of these together. And it can end up being pretty profound. You know, I tell people that the sort of simplest way to think about it is, I'm sure you remember those magic eye paintings or art things you would see like at the dentist office, and it just looks like a scatter of colors, and then you cross your eyes and you see the 3D image underneath. I think
yes. Sorry about that. Yes.
No, that's okay. That's okay. I did a ramble and then threw a question at you in the middle. And then I think of that as kind of what the tarot does in terms of your own conscious versus subconscious. So I think it's like you're looking at your life with normal vision, and the tarot kind of helps you cross your eyes and see the 3D image underneath in your subconscious. And I've yet to find something that, for me personally, that is as effective at doing that as the tarot is.
Well, you're definitely not alone in that, like, the deep study of the tarot. So I'm going to ask you a few questions about what you just said. So I think you said something really interesting. I don't know if this is a question or maybe an observation, but you can definitely respond to it. Is you discussed, you didn't say this word specifically, but you definitely alluded to it. And because you're a great writer, you'll know that I just picked it up. Is that you spoke about the grammar between the cards, their sort of relationality. And I think this is also interesting in your book, because that is kind of Jim's relationship with his daughter, is kind of like that related but deep relationship, but it's also like individuated by the experience, the flaws, the misperceptions, and the bullshit of the multiverse around them.
Right. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah. And there's a sense in which that's like the heart of what narrative is, like storytelling is. And so to me, the tarot, I was a writer first, right? And the tarot really unlocked for me when I started to see the analogy between tarot practice and storytelling. I sometimes, as a cheeky sort of promotional tagline to try to get people to reach out to me to get their tarot cards read, I will say, let me tell you a story about yourself right now. And I think that's kind of what the tarot is doing, because it functions just like narrative. However, a narrative film, right? You've got running motion video with actors reading lines. In narrative fiction, you've got, more or less complete sentences telling you a fairly detailed story that has a particular opening in it that allows for the reader to project their own imagination into it, right? And there's other narrative arts, the theater, etc. The tarot is like the most, in a certain sense, is like the most postmodern metafictional narrative process of all of them. It's random images that we then collage through a mostly subliminal process into a story about the person reading it. And to me, that's just cool as hell. Whether and then it turns out for me, it also turns out like useful, like it will answer questions for me. So I mean, there's so many fronts on which I just find it endlessly fascinating.
It truly is endlessly fascinating. I
Yeah.
agree. And because I always relate it to the tree, right? So I kind of like, even though I don't know the card associations for the paths, and that is also something very interesting, is that obviously the Golden Dawn system uses the 22 major arcana for the 22 paths, but then they also sometimes associate major arcana, like one of those like big name cards, as you mentioned, those like headliner cards, they will
Yeah.
assign to the Sephiroth sometimes. It depends on the system.
Correct. Yes, yeah. And the AE Waite was pretty well when he was, and he wasn't the first person. The first person to really make those connections was a guy named Antoine de Gebelin, who's a French sort of mystic and esoteric dude in the 1700s. He was the first person to really start applying the Kabbalistic elements to the tarot. And there's a lot of like, I personally think that the Kabbalah was retrofitted. I think the tarot started as basically a card game, but the sort of the pattern matching magic of like the human mind saw that, you know, if we just like squeeze it here and stretch it here and move a couple things around, it actually lines up with Kabbalah perfectly. And so I do think the Kabbalah was sort of retrofitted onto it, but that's one of the cool things about the tarot is it's evolved. It's how to say this in a way that isn't blasphemous. It's like it's a system that its own evolution is sort of baked into its program. Like it allows itself to sort of try new things out because artists all over the world make up new decks. And readers all over the world come up with new, like, subtle differences in interpretations. And so the whole system, like, evolves over time. And one of the things it has picked up and seems to work really well with it is the Kabbalah. But astrology works really well also. Many elements of Christianity work very, very well and play very well with the tarot. Yeah, it's got a lot of surface area and a lot of things stick to it in a pretty amazing way.
I totally agree with that, for the
Yeah.
record. I do think that tarot probably did start out like at that Northern Italian, Southern French game. My mom's French Canadian. I don't know, you probably don't know this, but I've talked about it many times on the show. But I always found that sort of like regional idea that I know this is very like new age, but like project yourself into the historical past and, you know, try and think if you have any connection to that thing. I probably don't have any connection to the tarot in like a more like ancestral terms, but I still think it's, you know, very interesting system. And I also think I think you're right, and I think there's something interesting about the paradox of the I wrote down paradox of the moving cards, because there's you know, the Astrum Argentum at not at the regular grade, and I'm not in any of those orders, just for the record. I just want to be clear about that. But and this is a more Hebrew understanding as well, is they posit that the letters move. So if you assign the letters to the cards, then the cards have to move. That's why I find your sort of analogous comparison to a film so apt, because if you were really strong at memorizing the images, which a lot of Golden Dawn people, I give them credit for that, they are very good at the memorization of the cards, you could actually, in your mind, take it through a story. Like you wouldn't even necessarily need the externality of the narrative. Like a good practitioner could almost do it themselves.
Yeah. I think that's true. I think it's interesting to note, like, I don't know how good of a practitioner I am. I think of myself as like a what is it? What is like 2 belts down from a black belt? What is that, like purple belt?
Like, purple or green. Yeah, you're right.
I think of myself as like a purple, maybe brown belt. I think of myself in that territory. There's a ton of stuff I'd like to learn, but I also I've also learned a fair amount at this point. And the only reason I sort of bring that up is I do think it's interesting when I read for another person versus when I read for myself. When I read for another person, there's a lot of context and explaining, and I'm reaching for I have a sort of quiver of contemporary analogies, like little anecdotes that I can relate to different cards, and you can bring in religious and scientific stuff sometimes or whatever. But then when I read for myself, it's much faster, and it just turns into this like narrative little scene that plays out. You kind of lay all the cards out, and then it's a little it's like a little scene that plays out for me, and it all makes sense. It's like, oh yeah, I'm doing this. I need to do this. This is what happened. This is the thing I'm not thinking about. This is the thing that I'm aware of. And it all sort of makes sense with a certain dynamic. It's sort of in time. It's like a cross section of a completely fluid process. So yeah, the the letters moving is an interesting. I haven't really thought about that specifically before, but that's really interesting.
Well, I'll just say that has put me in a lot of conflicts with people who have a more fixed idea of the tree. My idea is the correct one, to be honest. Like my idea is maybe I shouldn't say that. It's not the correct one. I mean, it is the correct one, but it also is like more of a. I don't want to say advanced, because I'm like you. I'm just a green belt. I'll just call it that. Like whatever that is. If that's middle positionality, that's fine. But you know, like that's my understanding. So I can't speak to like some higher knowledge or anything like that. But from my like understanding, which is quite good, of Hebrew Kabbalah, I mean, that is more of the way to understand the tree, is that the letters are moving through the paths, and the letters are also light. So they're self-illuminating, flashing colors, like very Dion Fortune, right?
Yeah. No, I love that. I love that. I don't think I have anything to add to that. It's where the one thing I would say is like, it's I think this is true of many things. I think I have a certain phobia or allergy to like fixed laws and rules. I do believe in something like an objective morality in terms of how you act. I don't know that we can necessarily grasp it as individual, flawed human beings, but in terms of, as I was saying sort of earlier on, like all of these different systems being attempts to narrativize an approach, that means to me they're sort of all open. As soon as you try to fix them too much in place, they begin to ossify, and they no longer become the pathway they could have been. And so I've had conversations about the tarot, and I have, there are people in the tarot world who, a specific card means like 3 bullet points, 3 single word bullet points. That's what a card means. And it's like, that's not really, those are pencil rubbings of a deeper truth that you have to find in the card.
That's a perfect place, Brad. I don't know if you did that on purpose. Good mic drop moment too.
Okay, good.
Meditations on the tarot. Like I'm familiar with Tomberg and some of that more Martinist material. I'm not a Martinist, but I researched it, and then I was like, oh, Greg K's doing like a series. He did like a I don't know, 7-part series on it. And I was like, okay, well, he's very good Kabbalist. So, I'll just do what he's doing because it makes sense, right?
Yeah,
so you use the image to meditate, basically. But what I want to ask you, what system did you use? And do you have a card that you could kind of a little like narrate a little bit through? You don't have to reveal all your secrets or anything, but
sure. No, I mean, I'm happy to reveal secrets. You're sort of asking like, what's my sort of lineage almost, I guess.
I mean, it doesn't have to be that specific, but do you have a specific book or like is there an approach or like a author that you like, whatever that is?
So no, there's a it's interesting. So like if you take an analogy to Christianity, right? Like the Children's Illustrated Bible and the deepest theological text out there both have to work, if that makes sense, right? Like if you're a believing Christian, the simplest version of the thing has to be true, and the most sophisticated, scholastic, complicated has to be true. And so the tarot for me, there's 2 poles, One is Meditations on the Tarot, A Journey into Christian Hermeticism by Valentin Tomberg, written anonymously, but we all know his name now. An amazing work, you know. I've read it multiple times, and every time I read it, I'm still like seemingly entirely new passages appear in that book every time I open it. Just incredibly rich. You can learn. I don't know if there's a better book to learn about Hermeticism by itself, honestly, than that book. But incredible for getting the deepest layers, particularly of the major arcana. And then on the other end, the Children's Illustrated Bible version is a website called learntarot.com. And it's scratching the surface. It's a 101, and it's super helpful to start to get comfortable with not only the idea that because when you first with a person first cracks open a tarot deck, it seems like an insurmountable amount of imagery to sort of master. And learntarot.com breaks all of that stuff down and gives you some portable, fairly simplistic interpretations for each card. The important thing is to realize that those are just stepping your foot in the door. That's just a cartoon drawing of Adam and Eve, right? That's not the whole thing. But it's a great place to start. And I learned a ton there. And I did go through like just memorization things. Can I remember 3 words for every card? But then there's a whole spectrum of texts in between learntarot.com and Meditations on the Tarot. I really like 78 Degrees of Wisdom by Rachel Pollack. I really like the work of most of the work of Mary K. Greer, particularly Understanding the Tarot Court. I like there's a book by gosh, what's that guy's first name? Richard Cavendish. I think it's just called The Tarot. It's sort of a coffee table book, but it's great especially in terms of major arcana interpretations. And then another thing I followed, not specifically a book, but I don't know if you're familiar with Georgina Rose. Is that her name? I always feel like I mess people. Yes. I always feel like I mess people's names up on podcasts, but I'm trying to remember.
Don't worry about it. She'll never come on this one. Don't worry about that, Brad. Okay. Hopefully she'll go on yours, but she won't.
I'm gonna try. I'm gonna reach out to ask her at some point.
You should.
So I've been inspired by her for sure. And there's another woman, I'm literally blanking on her name. She what the heck is her name? Tarot for Change, I think is the name of the book. And you know, some of these are fairly and there is, I think, in these things I've sort of offered up, I think you'll see there's the super esoteric stuff, which is like the Valentin Tomberg stuff, and then the real pedestrian sort of functional stuff. I mean, I think this sort of represents the kind of schizophrenia that I have about tarot, which is I am interested in the super esoteric stuff, but I'm also interested in the like, how can I use this thing to make my life slightly better in like a direct, self-helpy, psychotherapeutic way, right? Like,
you want actionable results. You want something
exactly
that you can do and then also see and be like, this is objectively real. Right. And even a small improvement is still an improvement. You want something recordable. I understand that completely.
Yeah.
Very metaphysician.
For sure. And then also when I'm reading for other people, I'm not trying to, my point in reading for other people isn't to give them like this esoteric scholastic download. It's to give them, help them answer a question, like a specific question they have about their life, right? So sometimes that like kind of self-helpy stuff is what we all need, right? Like, we all want, I think I definitely want like esoteric answers to deep metaphysical questions, but then like, I also want like real basic stuff, like how can I get along with my wife a little bit better? Right? Like, I want both of those things. I want to meet God. I want to like come into some contact with the lowest hem of God's robe, but I also want to be like a little bit less disgruntled at my day job. so so the kind of the cool thing about tarot is I think you can use it for towards both of those ends.
Absolutely, it's the paradox of the householder. So
Mhm.
it's like,
Mhm.
you're balancing the polarities of that, very deep arcane mysteries, we'll call it tunnel, deep in the tunnels of Set, but
Yeah.
you also have to live on Malkuth. You have to live like in the world that you create. So that is partly
Yes.
your family, your relational connections, all of that. So,
Mhm.
I agree with you, Brad, that there's nothing wrong with like some of the outer material. And I love the
Yeah.
analogy of the children's Bible, like the children's illustrated Bible. For some
Yeah.
people, that is what they're going to connect with at the deepest core. Like that will actually trigger or approximate Gnostic experiences, I think, or
Yes.
Noetic experiences.
Yes.
Now, some people are not going to be able to get there with a children's illustrated Bible, but they will also
Right.
connect with it. You have to let those people sort of find their own path. That's how I would think of it. You're
100%. Yeah,
right. And
absolutely.
that's totally fine. And that's completely fine. Some people are going to want a deeper, layer of reality. So,
Mhm.
I think I love the idea that you can balance both by engaging with both materials and even contemporary materials. Like I'm much more traditional. It's not like but I'm not a snob in like the way
Right.
I do it. I just stick to my like little niche sort of subject stuff. But
Sure.
it's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
not that I'm not open to, obviously I read a lot of chaos magic. That's very contemporary, very, very contemporary,
Mhm.
much more contemporary than tarot in many ways.
Yeah.
And so I have appreciation for both, and I think it's important for people to have like material, practical results if you're engaging with esoterica rather than thinking it's just like it's not just like an ascetic, like doing your HGA like off in the woods alone kind of
Right.
endeavor. It can be
Right.
something more for people right now.
Yeah, no, 100%. And yes, and I am also guilty of being drawn to the intellectual, the sort of cerebral and aesthetic aspects of it as well, right? Like I probably started to like wander towards esotericism because it seemed cool. You know what I mean? Like that's probably why I started sort of walking in that direction, and then found a bunch of stuff there that I found incredibly useful and like and not only cool, but like I could it started to fill gaps in my life and in my understanding of myself and my understanding of reality and all of that. But yeah, if it's just sort of a cerebral exercise and just a sort of aesthetic thing, I don't know if that's for me wouldn't be enough for me to like play around with the tarot cards every day.
I agree. It has to
Yeah,
transcend the aesthetics of it, and
I
it
think
has
so
to,
too.
yeah, you have to be able to, like for me, I do what I do because I've actually that I feel like I've done like interesting things with it, and I go to an interesting consciousness place with it, and I can
Mhm.
sort of maneuver in that space. So that's why I do it, because for me it has actionable results. So,
Yeah.
but I think that can be true of many paths. And I think this is a very dharmic way to think about, like very flexible, like, you only control yourself, you're your locus. So
Mhm.
how do you do that in the world? And I think that that's something that you do talk about, like not to bring up Twitter discourse at all, but
Sure.
I do
Yeah.
think that that's very
Okay.
actionable thing that you do talk about that can relate to both the Kabbalah and tarot. Is you talk about like this, like you said, like you have the framework of your day job, and that
Mhm.
sort of gives you the single pointedness to sort of like pursue life through that. And then you have this other study, which is tarot, which is more cerebral, but then you also let it be a noetic sort of wisdom experience in and of itself. You kind of, as you
Yeah.
said, you're a true alchemist, you synthesize both things.
Well,
So
yeah, I
yeah.
guess I try to be. Yeah, I mean, I definitely try to be. It's interesting. I don't know. I don't know how you feel about Jordan Peterson, right, as a cultural figure. And I'm not here to advocate for him or anything like that, or have a long discourse about him. But I do remember him saying one thing that I was really I found really interesting. Um, he's talking about how he does these lectures, and he was sort of like, if these aren't useful to, like, his point was sort of something like, if these aren't useful to you, then what's the point of what I'm doing? And I find that, for me, that's sort of like how through that same prism, I think I got better at reading tarot for other people, because I really sat down, and when I start flipping the cards, it's like my genuine intention is like, I want this to be useful for the person. I'm not trying to impress them like at all. I'm not trying to make it like, isn't that cool? Like a trick that I just did. Like, it's genuinely like, can I make this useful for that person? And I think that's like a I don't know, that just feels like a more straightforward, cleaner way to approach things. Writing fiction is maybe a little bit different, because what the hell is useful? The whole thing is kind of the whole thing's kind of weird to begin with, right? To sit down and write a book and then somebody else reads it. If we weren't so culturally conditioned to it, it would seem like a pretty unusual practice, I think. But yeah, I think on the spiritual side, or the sort of self-development side, whatever, I think a priority on, this thing, everybody's life is hard, man. Like, even if it seems easy on the surface, it's hard. And we all have questions and hardships and uncertainties and insecurities and worry about the future. We all have all of these things. And so, I think any one spiritual practice can be a route to not just survive that stuff, but like get through it in a real way, right? Make that chaos into some kind of garden. So
I love that. Obviously,
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. Transform the carnal ground into the Vajra body, like Brad is saying, but he's using a little nicer
Other
metaphor.
words.
But
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. I love
So Brad,
that.
do you mind take us through one or two of your favorite cards, or take me through? I guess I should
Sure.
speak in us. That's a little, but
Yeah.
please, thank you.
Sure. Let's I got my deck here. Let me just do a quick little, this isn't like a real shuffle, but I'm just gonna to randomize them. All right. And I'll just sort of say kind of what this card means. Okay. Ace of Cups. Okay. So cups are associated with in the Jungian model of psychological functions, they would be associated with feeling. They're associated with the unconscious. They're associated with water. The way that I like to think about the cups is I have a sort of, they're also associated with like the Holy Grail, for instance, the Grail, the Grail quest and all of that. Anytime you see a cup that shows up in mythology or folklore, it's that cup, it's that same cup. But the way that I like to think of it is a vessel. And you can see what I mean by this in a sort of a negative example that's pretty easy. When people have problems with alcohol or drugs, you'll often hear them say, it's like, I had a hole I was trying to fill, right? I put drugs and heroin in there or whatever. Or, eventually I figured out how to put God in there. That thing, that hole they're talking about, that is also the cup. And the Ace of Cups, all aces in the tarot, are fundamentally a reminder that as a human being, as a spiritual being, we have been granted this sort of almost this like birthright gift. And in this case, when it comes to the Ace of Cups, that's that vessel, that's that hole that we have, that space within us that we luckily get to try and fill with whatever we want. However, some things are better to fill it with, than others. And so when I see an Ace of Cups in readings, this is usually just a reminder that like, hey, you have a deep spiritual need that in your day-to-day life is going to look like an emotional need. And it needs to be taken care of. And it needs to have things. There are positive and negative things that you can put into it. And generally the positive things that you put into it somehow tend to spill over and fill other people's cup as well. So you put love into that vessel, it tends to spill out and put love into other people's vessels. And so it's just a beautiful card about that pattern of being a human being. If you put, you know, bad stuff in there, resentment, gambling, drugs, you know, gooning, whatever, like that's what you use to fill that vessel, it tends to deplete the vessels of other people around you at the same time. So yeah,
I
that's
agree
Ace
with
of
you,
Cups.
Brad.
Yeah.
Bodhicitta maxing, as the kids say, right? Fill it with
Yeah.
loving kindness, and then you know, that will be in the world too.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that.
absolutely.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but yeah, I totally
No,
agree.
no,
I
no.
was like dying
Yeah.
to say that. Okay.
Yeah, I love that.
That was
I love
great.
that.
And I also think that the Grail lore is extremely fascinating, very aeonic. We don't have to get into that. But you know, I do love Mary Magdalene as like a Gnostic figure, but not necessarily in the capital G Gnosticism of what everybody thinks that means, just more of a allegorical figure. Okay, so take us through another card. Sorry, Brad, the last one. I won't make you do too many, I love it.
I love doing this. I'm just cutting the deck to get kind of a random one. I might skip it if it doesn't seem as interesting. Yeah, see, that one's not worth talking. I mean, it's a great card, but Temperance. So this is out of the Major Arcana. This is
this is actually my card, and I did not ask Brad to draw it from the deck, but okay.
Great. Well, that's the kind of these are just the kinds of synchronicities that pop up. So every Major Arcana card has just untold depths that you can get into. On the one, I like to sometimes talk about what I call the Renaissance Fair interpretation is. And what I mean by that is, if you've ever been to a Renaissance festival, you can usually get a tarot reading. And this is not to dismiss anybody that's doing them at those, but they're usually stripping it way down to absolute basics because they're trying to get people in and out so they can do as many readings in a day as they can, right? And it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It means that it's the simplest possible interpretation. In the simplest possible interpretation of Temperance, it's about balancing things, right? It's about finding your effective balance between different emotions, different it could be, depending on the reading and the person who's doing the reading, it could be about literally like actual temperance in terms of not consuming so much alcohol or whatever. But there's ultimately ends up being more to that as well. I mean, the card on it is an angel, and the angel is pouring from one cup to another in this sort of physics defying manner in the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. And because of that, it calls to mind all the stuff that I was just saying about the Ace of Cups, because it is two cups pouring one into the other. But it also calls to mind another card in the Major Arcana, which is the Star, which is an amazing card. And the Star has to do with the Star of Bethlehem. It's the second star from the right and straight on till morning. It's that thing hanging in the sky that you sort of direct. It's the star that Pinocchio wishes upon, right? It's all of these stars, and it's the sort of direct. It's the well, I shouldn't say quite direct, because the sun card is even more so, but it's the sort of divine light that you allow to sort of direct your life, particularly after you've had an ego destroying cataclysm of sorts. And Temperance is a sort of the Temperance card in some ways is a sort of preliminary shadow of that card. In fact, in the Rider-Waite deck, there is a sort of Mount Vesuvius erupting in the background, and volcanic, a volcano is this fascinating phenomenon in which the earth burps forth flame, like molten rock, which is the merger of fire and fire and earth, obviously, and then it's can be very, very destructive, but then it becomes incredibly fertile soil after a while, right? So it's this alchemical process that the earth itself is going through, so that the Temperance card has that even more, has that analogy within its own background. And that volcano has generated this incredibly fertile territory, which Temperance is standing upon. So this card is all about balancing, the way that I see it. It's all about balancing essentially the four different classical elements, right? Earth, air, wind, and fire. And the angel is got wings, so that has to do with air. I already sort of talked about the volcano thing, but the angel also has 1 foot in the water and 1 foot on the earth. And that's about balancing that earth and water thing. And when I sort of say that in the tarot, the simplest thing that I'm talking about is that, like, terrestrial, real world, everyday, I can knock my knuckles on it reality, but also balancing that with the unconscious, the deep waters of being a human being, all that stuff that's way deep down in your inside yourself that you only explore in dreams and in deep meditative states. And temperance is trying to bring those two things in some way together. Yeah.
That was
There's more
incredible. Thank you so
All right,
much,
good.
bro. No, that was, I was literally, I was like taking it all in. I was like, this is so great.
Good.
It was really great. Awesome. Okay, well, I do want to talk. You touched on it. You talked about the 1 foot in the water and 1 foot on the terrestrial sort of land. So I will just say really quickly that this is a magical paradox. What element comes first? What element represents the primordial ground? That's how we would say it in Buddhism. But it's in every kind of magical system. This is a question like: does the fire come first? Does the water come first? Do we die by fire? Do we die by water? Or does the ground come first? How does air arise? Is that the composite? In Tantra, we would say that's the composite element. It's the 3 in 1. So it's like the 13, and then it expands into air. And then we have a 5th element too, which is space. So, and that actually also relates to the temperance card if you understand how they put it on the tree. So I find it just a very fascinating card. Yes, I do identify strongly, as I said at the very beginning, as a Sagittarius. So it does make it, it does fit my sun sign. So at least in that
that's
way.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And even
I am curious. I am more, I'm very fascinated in the Buddhist conception of the sort of elemental stuff, because I find the like Empedocles style 4 classical elements thing to be, I find it to be incredibly powerful, and I'm always finding new depths to it. And so, but I don't know the Eastern. I really don't know the Eastern perspective on it at all.
Well, I mean, I don't want to like inundate you and be like,
sure,
give you like a lesson. I'm not trying to do that, but I agree. It is very fascinating, and in the fact, like, where it's really interesting is in the comparison between the two. I would posit, perhaps this is just speculatively, but I have posited in the past that the Western system kind of did lose, or at least forget. Now, I'm not saying it didn't exist. I'm saying they just forgot. I've heard different people, different podcasters, different occultists discuss the 5th element and what that is. Obviously, aether is, I would even argue now, like, that's kind of the chaos magic reclamation of that 5th element. But what is the 5th element? So if you listen to the group show, I'll often say this, like, just watch the 5th element. It explains everything. The last 3 minutes of the movie. That's like
I'll have to go back to that. Okay.
That's the whole metaphysics of the universe. Like, what contains the 5th element? Well, it's really love. I know that's cheesy, but it really explains it well, because love happens in perception. Because Bruce Willis goes, "I love you" to the character Lilu, and she goes, "Well, I don't like, do humans even have a conception of what that is? And like, you have to say it, and I have to," and then he's like, "Oh, you have to say it back to me," meaning that she has to accept it, process it, acknowledge it, and then also like respond in kind. Like that thing you said about the Ace of Cups, like, it's the reciprocity, very Hesed, very like loving kindness again. So that's in Tantra, that actually idea where then she screams the aether upwards. That's very tantric. She screams the aether upwards using the word. That's how we would conceptualize it, because it's sound that captures space. There's only one way to do that, and the word also arises in that 4 elemental configuration. So we would say, what is each element? Like, what is the primordial nature of each element? Do we put a lot of preconceptions? We talked a lot about this at the beginning, very Qlippothic, right? Like, are we putting a lot of those aggregates, those skandhas as we would call them, onto how we understand fire, earth, air, water? And then once those things can be clarified, space arises. Now, when we get to the space, and this is a great debate even among Tantric Buddhists, when you get to that space, what do you do there? So some people would say you sit there. That's a more Dzogchen way. I don't practice Dzogchen. I'm more of a Mahayyoga person. But so for me, we do something. There is something very, I called it dialogical before because, again, relating to words. That's how I understand it. I'm not saying this is necessarily the perfect. My explanation is like the one. I don't think that. I'm just saying that the way I understand it's dialogical. We are moving through the space of the moon and the sun. If you want to take that as a metaphor, that's totally fine. But again, it is related to that temperance card. So I think it's really interesting that it sort of came back to that.
I love that. Yeah, I absolutely love that. It's fascinating. But you know, it's interesting. So in the Western tradition, it was Empedocles who kind of first nailed down these four. I mean, I'm sure other people were thinking about it, but he's the person who sort of nailed this down. But he does propose as like a substrate within which all of these kind of move. He calls it love and strife, and he sort of distinguishes between the two. But the way that I read what he's saying is that they're sort of, those are just two sides of the same thing. It's like strife is just the absence of love or something like that. So he's basically saying love is the fifth element, and so was Captain Planet. So I think we're all.
It really is. It really is. It's just watch Fifth Element. It's all in there.
Yeah. No, I say that as sort of a joke, but it's very much true. I'm currently working on so in my Method Madness show, I do these madness. I call them the madness episodes, and they're these. I read a bunch of extra material and I come up with theses, and sometimes it's historical stuff, sometimes it's whatever comparative literary stuff, sometimes I go into the biography of the writer, whatever seems appropriate. And in this case, I'm doing it on a book called The Tunnel by William H. Gass. And I realized in reading it, and it's not that big of a stretch, that William H. Gass was sort of knowingly writing a book within and about the domain of Earth. And so the whole episode I'm doing is, well, what does it mean that William H. Gass wrote an Earth book? And I just wrote an Earth book as well. So I the whole episode is me kind of diving into this thing. And I had a moment when I was putting it together, I was like, oh yeah, Captain Planet, that they were right. They kind of had part of this. They had like part of the puzzle figured out here, actually.
I mean, I don't know if this is going to be crazy for you, Brad, but maybe not. If you've listened to my show, I don't think this will be crazy, but I do think there's probably a Kabbalistic hermeneutic in Captain Planet. I mean, he's an adamantine man. I mean, he has that blue-green turquoise hair. It's very Hasidic, very like Jupiterian, expansive. It takes love flies into the sky. His earthly wife is named Gaia. I mean, there's absolutely like a quality of like a more Enochian, we'll call it metaphysics, apparent there. And I also say there is a Kabbalah in Sailor Moon, like the woman who wrote Sailor
I don't know
Moon.
Sailor Moon. I don't know Sailor Moon at all, so that's fascinating.
Okay. Yeah. This is gonna be for people. Most people will be listening for you for sure, and they'll think, "Oh, this guy is crazy." He's talking about Kabbalah and Sailor Moon.
I love it.
It absolutely is there. There's an Aeonic story. I would go to the mat for this idea. There absolutely is an Aeonic story in Sailor Moon and a Kabbalistic retelling of the tree. And I had a really great Kabbalist on. His name is Sochki, and he was the one who really introduced me to this idea. Obviously, I take it in my own like understanding of the tree, and he is a more Hasidic, like he's a Hasidic Jew. So for me, I take it more in my post-Lurianic, kind of like post-theistic, weird tantric Buddhist way. But for him, there is a story, and I have to agree that I only see it now. Like anytime I even think of the Sephirah, I can just reimagine them as the Sailor Scouts, and it's almost the same thing for me now.
I mean, that's the thing. Well, that's like whether or not they intentionally did that, if it works as a valuable system, everything is too complicated to understand. So we always need like an ancillary kind of system to keep it contained within our mind enough to use it. So to me, it's like, man, if Sailor Moon lines up with it, yeah, rock with Sailor Moon. That seems it's almost like a cheat code for keeping it all in your head, it sounds like.
I mean, she used tarot extensively when she was writing
Did
the
she?
series. There is
Okay.
a
Yeah.
Sailor Moon tarot from like the
Okay. Yeah.
80s.
Remember
And,
that.
you know, there are rumors. I'm not saying I have no proof of this. It's just a internet, like Japanese, like esoterica forum. I am friends with some people in Japan, Japanese people who run
Yeah.
like the Japanese Chaos Magic Institute and that
Okay.
kind of stuff. Just like, you know, just like very online friends, not like deep or anything. But
Yeah.
it is interesting that I've heard that yeah maybe the husband was initiated into the Astrum Argentum. I mean there is working groups. There are definitely a lot of Japanese occultists. People way underestimate it, and even I've been like shy to talk about like these accounts that follow me on Instagram sometimes, like these more very esoteric, very funny kind of like Japanese Discordians. So
Yeah.
I think it's real. I think they see it too. I don't think it's that crazy, but I
Yeah.
agree with you that it can be synchronistic. It doesn't
Mhm.
have to be that she's necessarily thinking about the tree of life from Kabbalah and working through it. She might just be working through the tarot like you did,
Mhm.
and then she arrives at very similar conclusions when she applies it to astrology.
Yeah, I mean well, this is the thing. I mean, if there is some divine truth to the Kabbalah, and I think that there is, it makes sense that it would show up. Some of the aspects of it, at least, would show up in other genuine works of inspiration, right? Because it's like an aspect of the universe or reality or something, and so it makes sense that it would show. It would make sense to me that it would show up in other places, seemingly as a coincidence or a synchronicity. But it's, artists are doing weird stuff, man. Where they're tapping it, they're tapping in, and so yeah, it wouldn't surprise me for somebody to kind of come up with it on their own, but it also at the same time would not surprise me one iota if the creator of Sailor Moon was deep, deep, deep into into this stuff. So
That's the interesting thing about writers. Like I always cite
mhm,
whenever I have other writers on, Brad, I always say like Austin Osman Spare. He is
mhm,
the, you know, he's the quintessential like writer,
mhm.
magician, a sigil maker, and he understood those to be related to, like as you said, like words. It's a complex wisdom science writing in and of itself. You don't necessarily have to think of yourself as like the great wisdom scientist
Right.
of the age. A lot of writers do, obviously,
Yeah. Yeah.
but not,
Yeah.
you know, they're all drawing from that place, that liminal sort of imaginal realm. I totally agree with that.
100%. Yeah,
And
100%.
so there is something and it's a natural metaphysics now. You know, does everybody tap into the same place at the same density at the same um you know, depth of understanding? Probably not. Just like we were
Mhm.
saying about the children's Bible, it's like not everyone is meant to be you know, dragged at the recesses of the tunnels of Set, but some people
Right.
are going to be attracted to do that and also like work
Right.
through the elements. Like when you said that, I was like, oh, that's really profound, because that's exactly how you would do a mandala working in
Mhm.
tantric Buddhism, is that you would sort of work through the element, visualize it as the deity and the specific magical color, flashing color, and like all the sort of elemental and iconographic representations of earth, which don't necessarily have to take the, they definitely don't take the same form as like Western magicians would understand it, and we don't even use the same typical color. We use yellow or gold.
Oh,
So which
interesting.
is,
Yeah.
you know, that is some, I've seen other systems use that, but it seems very uncommon when I've explained it before.
Mhm.
So, you know,
Yeah.
it's like a, yeah, it's a deep hermeneutic, and you have to work through that element until you've really accomplished it.
Yeah, yeah, and this is not would not be any claim to sort of mastery, but as the novels that I'm writing, and I'm working on another one, um, I am the Earthen Dark one is probably a little too on the nose, honestly. But I've basically chosen a sort of signature element to serve as kind of a guiding principle for myself, but also as I'm also sort of investigating the deepest metaphorical space of that element as I can at the same time, while trying to write like a book that's just entertaining. So House of Sleep was sort of my water novel, my previous book, and The Earthen Dark is my earth novel, and the next one I've got, which does not yet have a title, is going to be my fire novel, apparently. Um, and I find that to be an interesting an interesting, I was going to say lens, but it's not even really lens. It's more like terrain. It's more like a metaphoric and imagistic terrain to operate on that has its own inbuilt grammar of associated meanings to draw on. But as soon as I say that, it makes it, I could hear somebody listening to this that hasn't read the Earthen Dark and be like, oh, that sounds dry and boring. Trying to do all of that while also writing a page turner. That's the space that I'm trying to live in as a writer.
That's incredibly interesting that you linked it to water and then now to earth, and then your next one will be fire. So then when you write your fourth book, it will have to obviously be air. And then you'll have to do a kind of fifth, like the resolution of all those paradoxes that you created in the writing of the four, and do a space book. So
yeah. No, that's and then I can maybe I can retire after that. We'll see.
We'll see. I don't think people want you to retire yet. They would be mad at me if you said that on my show, and then you were like, "Oh, I'm writing 5 and I'm done."
No. I got a couple more. I got a couple more in me, but we'll see. It's just it's a. But I didn't really choose the order of them, to be honest. You let it happen. I kind of let it happen, and I didn't realize House of Sleep was a water novel until I was like halfway through it. And then it was like, now I understand what I'm trying to do. And then, I was like, let's go back to the beginning and revise a bunch of this and try to do it a little bit more thoughtfully without losing the magic, hopefully. But then the Earthen Dark was, the inspiration for that book is I was spending a lot of time in the sewer. And my day job is I'm a geotechnical engineer. My so-called field of expertise is literally the engineering properties of dirt. So that made sense for that to be terrain that I could work in from a narrative standpoint. So
again, there's another tantric element to that I find very interesting, Brad, is that you utilize the sort of geological properties of earth, of dirt, to purify quicksilver, like what we call sotel in Tibetan, which is like a very important medicinal and like tantric magical sorceress ingredient. So, but you can only do that after you've completed the working of the 5. You then return to the ground, and then you can start to then you can. It's said that quicksilver purifies in 7 sort of processes. So if it purifies through the ground, it has to purify through 7 sort of densities. I don't know if that's true. I've never collected it in the wild like that. So, but it is interesting.
That is, that's totally that. So when you're saying basically purifying quicksilver, this is as both you're talking like actually literally physically as in terms of like I need to kind of understand the terrain we're talking about there.
Yes, I absolutely get it. Okay, so in Tantra, I would say this is how I've explained it before, and this is a more legitimate way. It's not something my riff or anything, but there's a dialectic that I've called the inner outer secret dialectic. So there's the outer dialectic, which I'm positing is actually in the middle, is that physical sort of thing you're talking about. So the inner level, in terms of purifying quicksilver, would be to purify it using you're going to use ritual methodology, meaning that you're going to sort of stand over the pot, add herbs, recite mantras, change the water a specific amount of times. It's very technical. Whereas the sort of natural purification, which is the outer layer, is allowing it to drip through 7 different sort of phases of earth. And then the secret layer is where you combine the 2 things. So you're using magical methodologies, medicinal, meaning adding herbs, as well as natural purification methods. Maybe you are making sort of like earthen aggregates for the quicksilver to pass through.
Okay. Interesting. So this is Eastern alchemy, basically. Is that like
that's
rough
absolutely
way
fair
of thinking about it? Okay.
All magic in my.
I'm not trying to reduce it to anything. I'm just trying to get my Western head around it. Yeah.
I think all magic can be reduced, not reduced in a reductive. That kind of is a paradox, but it can be, all magic can be understood. Maybe I'll use that language. Can be understood as alchemy. I don't think that
Right.
that's crazy, or
Yeah.
I don't think that goes against Buddhism or Tantra in any way. I think that's a very like profound way to sort of understand it. We do add like we have more layers in the sense that we have like a greening, and there are different
Okay.
tantras that describe it in different ways and what element goes where and how you sort of make that interaction happen. So it's very text dependent system, and that's one of the problems. But I do think fundamentally you can understand it all alchemically,
Right.
even Western
Interesting.
tradition as well.
Fascinating. Yeah, absolutely. Well, yeah, that yes, yeah, that's man, you're opening up a bunch of search tabs in my brain. This is great.
Well, I'll have to have you on another time, Brad, and then we can really get into the weeds on
Yeah.
this and be like,
Yeah.
okay, let's look at the, you know, cross sections of the different systems. And
It's fascinating stuff to me. You know, just on this note, the alchemical stuff, I mean, that's in the tarot as well, for sure.
absolutely.
But I don't know if you know this. I think I'm the only person who's ever made this connection, as far as I'm aware. I was reading in my research for Earthen Dark. I was reading this book called I can't remember the name of it now. It's basically a work of pop archaeology, and it's really good because basically what this woman did is her and her research partner went to all these different caves where the absolute crudest of cave art is, where it's like not even art, it's just like crude symbols. And she was trying to figure out like basically where the first glimpse of something like a written language is and what that might have been. And she finds she basically starts to stitch together something like you know, tens of thousands of years old, something like an alphabet. That's not really what's interesting. The point I'm going to make. She references this I think it's 120,000 year old. It's at least 100,000 years old archaeological site in which like proto-humans were processing ochre into you know, basically processing ochre so they could use it. And the thing about ochre is if you process it, you take it from, depending on how you apply heat and the timing in these sorts of things, you can take it from red to yellow to black to white. I think that's the order. And so I saw this and was like, so humans were doing alchemy 100,000 years ago. And it just, I still am kind of reeling from that. I think all of this, like, and what's so significant about that to me is, you know, what humans were doing 100,000 years ago was probably pretty crude. I don't know how they even would have conceptualized it, but I think it is indicative of the fact that the stuff that you're talking about and the stuff that I've been talking about relevant to the tarot, this stuff is actually, we're talking about sort of the modern end of it, but this is a process that is really, really, really old. Right? Like there are tendrils of this down to some barely human figure on an outcropping in South Africa mixing ochre to ward off evil spirits. And there's a lineage that goes right from there to where we're sitting right now. I just find that absolutely fascinating.
Absolutely. I would say that's 110%. I'll use a magic number, 110% true. I mean, it's the primordial, we're talking about like alchemy as the primordial system or process, at least. Maybe we'll use more like axialist language. So yeah, absolutely it is. That's what all the systems are talking about. How do you get there? What do you do when you're there? How to like sort of transmute those things that arise, those poisons, those toxins. We even use that language in Tantra, like call it Klesha Maras, poisons of the mind or poisons of reality that arise within us, but they also can be reflected, as you were saying at the very beginning when you were discussing your book, actually, is that, yeah, they can be also reflected externally in the outside world. So that's absolutely true. And I think I want to end on a Detroit question, which might surprise you, but I think it ties into our discussion of Earth and sort of relationality as well when we were talking about the Ace of Cups, is that, so I think one of the things you've discussed on other shows and on your show for sure is that there is a kind of story that America is like a magical place, which I don't know if you know this, but I also agree with. I believe that personally as like a ontological truth, we'll call it. But I also think, like, how does that relate to Detroit, tying it into your own work and sort of your broad perspective on reality as it is?
No, this is a really good question. So Detroit is a peculiar place, and I'm maybe not the most well-traveled person in the world, but I've lived in half a dozen different states across the United States, and I've traveled a bit of the world. And so, I say this not without some experience with places outside of Detroit. It's a very peculiar place. I think there is, to the extent that sort of something like magic is in operation in the city of Detroit, or has been in the past, I think there has been actually some pretty dark forces at work in the city of Detroit. And what's interesting about, and I don't know that anybody would really even disagree with me, even people who love that city. I don't think they would disagree. But I think, and I'm kind of trying to deal with this on some level in the book I'm working on right now, which is set in 1934 in the city of Detroit, sort of a cop. It's sort of a hard-boiled detective sort of thing set in 1934 in Detroit. And there's something, Detroit was at one time a kind of engine, not just for American industry and development, but ultimately like for the world, right? We always, in Michigan, we grew up thinking Henry Ford invented the car, but in reality, he invented a whole bunch of processes that allowed the car to be possible, and then basically gave birth to the modern era that the car either allowed for or forced on us, depending on your perspective. And that Henry Ford was up to some stuff. I mean, he was a strange individual. I don't think that he was, thinking in deliberately occultist terms, but the things that had to be summoned and put into place to make all of that happen, they now have the feeling of inevitability. But I think at the time there was a direct waging with wrestling with the forces of history. And so Detroit was weirdly on the forefront of us launching into what we now think of as the modern era. And I sometimes wonder what dark forces had to be harnessed and put into service in order to make that happen. Because if people aren't familiar with the history of Detroit, in the earlier part of the 20th century, people called it the Paris of the Midwest, and it was known. It was very, very wealthy, and you can still see the remnants of some of that if you drive around this place. It was well respected in the world and understood as a place of culture and refinement, mostly because of all of this money. And then it crashed as hard as any other place ever has in America. Racial tensions overflowed. Crack cocaine hit this place like a meteor. And it went on this precipitous decline until it was considered, until it became, for a time, the most dangerous city in the United States. And because of that, there's a whole way in which in my opinion, can tell the story of America and set the whole thing in the city of Detroit. And I suppose you can do that with any city, but to me, the dramatic narrative swings in the history of Detroit are sort of emblematic of the birth pains of modern American society. And in that way, it's a kind of a fascinating place. But that's all sort of theoretical versus actually sort of living and being there. I happen to live in the cushy suburbs now. But I'll tell you, I didn't think about this while I was working on the Earthen Dark, and the Earthen Dark is set in the sewers of Detroit. But I remember working for my day job. I wasn't in the sewer at this time. I was on the surface, but being fairly near where the events of the Earthen Dark take place and running into I think he was probably homeless, a guy who was clearly had better days, missing some teeth, missing some clothes, hair pretty ratty, kind of walking down the street with that sort of semi-violent look in his eyes. And he came up to me and he said something, and I said something back, and then he said something, and then he looked me right in the eyes and he said, "You know this fucking place is haunted, right?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "This whole fucking city is haunted." And then he just kept walking down the street. And I've never found any way to disagree with that guy. So, yeah, I don't know. That's kind of rambly. I understand. But
No,
hopefully
that wasn't
somehow got to
rambly.
your
That
question.
wasn't. No, that's not rambly at all, because
Oh,
I
good.
think it's. I think that most of our spiritual interactions actually, instead of like doing it on grandiose sort of like we'll say cosmological terms, I think it's actually much more geo-ontological. Like where we are relates much more to our consciousness. I think we're able to access that sort of plane, if you want to say it, plane of existence. And I think that those spirits, if you want to call it the genus loci, if you want to say it's like the deity of the area or whatever it is, or your own personal like whatever daemon, high guardian angel, whatever, like whatever phrasing and system that you work with. I'm trying to not be, I'm trying to not alienate anyone, but I think that
Sure.
that is much more related to the places that we are, and I think it also dictates us, at least to a degree, its appearance for us.
Yeah. Yeah. I honestly, I mean, genius loci. I mean, I mean, the Earthen Dark has a big feature of it is that there is a genius loci to the sewers of Detroit, right? And yeah, there kind of is. It's an exaggeration in the book, but there is, and I think many places have that, or all places have that, and sometimes they're a little bit closer to the surface. You can make contact with them a little bit more readily. And Detroit is the kind of place, people talk about sort of like thin places. I'm sure you've heard this phrase. There are parts of Detroit that are a thin place, but I think when most people refer to that, it's like what's on the other side of that membrane is like angelic or something. And sometimes I think in the city of Detroit, what's on the other side of that membrane is a little bit more demonic than it is angelic.
I think that relates to Earthen Dark really well, though, because I think it's like Qlippothic. You're taking us into sort of the reflection of the dark aspects of both like ourselves and also like the metaphysical reality that is also like the carnal ground. So I mean that's not crazy for me, but I understand like if your orientation is more like if someone is more love and light, which there's nothing wrong with that too. Like as I
Right.
said, there's everybody has their own hermeneutic that they have to go about the world and
Mhm.
metaphysics. But I think that if you're talking about angels, like yeah, that's going to be a very scary place to sort of cross over. And Detroit has a kind of aura, a kind of mystique. So let me ask you,
Yeah.
I know I said that would be my last question, but I
No,
have
that's
one
fine. I'm
more.
having a
Okay.
great time, man.
Okay,
Ask as
me
many
too.
questions as you
Me
want.
too. Okay. So I want to ask about Detroit cinema because I
Mm.
mean the city is very kino, as the kids say. And
Yeah.
I think that it has like even in its maybe that's why maybe the contemporary or like cinematic filmic Detroit captures the ghost world element really
Mhm.
well on camera and on screen. So what is your favorite do you have a favorite Detroit film, Brad, and what is it?
Yeah, probably my favorite Detroit film. I don't know if I would have said this a few months ago, but I saw it again on the big screen at a little, like a volunteer theater here in the city of Detroit or near the city of Detroit. So probably my favorite Detroit movie is True Romance. Uh, and I know there's like a whole LA part to True Romance. It's sort of the back third of the movie or whatever. But that does capture a certain what's the word I'm sort of looking for? A kind of Byzantine quality to the place in that there's all these sort of interrelated and interpenetrating groups, I guess, like sort of living on top and inside and next to each other. It seems like it really that movie really captures that, and also sort of just the kind of hard tack reality of some certain aspects of Detroit. That's a little bit of an older movie, relatively speaking. I was trying to remember the I keep thinking it's It Follows, but is it It Follows? It's a horror movie. I think it's It Follows. It's also quite good at kind of capturing this certain. Let me make sure it's called It Follows. I think that's what it is. Yeah, It Follows, 2014 psychological horror. Yeah, that captures as well as anything I've seen what certain parts of Detroit feel like at night. I don't know if a movie has ever captured that quite as well as It Follows. So check that out if you haven't. It's good. It's a good little horror flick.
I think I've seen it. I can't remember. I very rarely watch like new cinema, so I would be much more inclined to watching the Christian Slater movie again than I would be to. But that's not necessarily to slag like It Follows. Like I'm sure it's good. I'll give it a try, Brad, for you.
Sure. Yeah.
I love. I do want to shout out that I love Gridlocked with Tupac. I know you're probably like, oh, that's so juvenile.
No, it's a good movie. I forgot about that being a Detroit movie. Yeah, that's a good movie too. Yeah. Yeah,
I just like how they navigate this like social welfare bureaucracy. That's very Qlippothic, right? I won't get into that, but there is a Qlippothic element to bureaucracy. Even Lurius, like the Rabbi Isaac Lurius, the terrifying ecstatic Kabbalist, he said like if you create a bureaucracy, you're creating Qlippas in the world. So so I always found that movie interesting.
I've never heard that, but that's true. Yeah,
that's true. So the Kabbalistic truth, you could say. So that's what I liked about Gridlock, because it does kind of describe that sort of subterranean, very like in the tunnels, deep in, can't escape. So how do you use the angles of the city, of the architecture, of the resources available to sort of escape the cave, as the metaphor says.
Right. Yeah. No, I may have to go back and watch that movie. I probably haven't seen that in 20 years since I last saw Gridlocked, and I'm probably I'm sure everything you're saying is true, and I bet I would make a lot more connections now than I would have 20 years ago.
It reads very differently after sort of the whole, we'll say, leftward progressive sort of movement of society. Like I think when it came out, it was just like kind of weird and avant-garde, and they're a triad, and they live in this great loft that doesn't really have like it's not like a normal, it's like an artist loft, like very industrial, and they're all addicted to heroin, and that's sort of like one of the primary components to the whole story. So it's a weird film. I think it stands up, but you'll have to tell me when you come on. Hopefully you'll come on again, and we'll talk about it. You can tell me, and we'll
all right,
discuss hopefully your next book as well. So thank you so much, Brad. I really appreciated that you came on. It was an amazing conversation. I knew it would be. I had no doubt in my mind. I was like, we'll find something to go on for like hours.
Absolutely. No, thank you. This was a blast. I'm happy to do this anytime.
Okay, awesome. And so I want you just to make sure that you say your whatever sites, plugs, whatever you want to give, and I'll make sure that's all in the show notes for everybody to check out. I highly recommend Earthen Dark, as well as Brad's podcast, Method and Madness. I think it's a great podcast. I listen to it myself. And he's had a lot of I really like Dustin. I really like Andrew. There's so many people that I'm like, I think are cool, and like the small little lit scene on Twitter. And so Brad does a great job on showcasing and promoting the people who are legit good writers. So thank you so much,
I'm trying to boost them. I won't say the reasons are 100% unselfish, but definitely, I'm trying to give people try to give people a space to express themselves. And there's some incredibly talented people I've been lucky enough to have come on and have shared their books with me and that sort of thing. It's been really cool. But check it out, madmethodpod.com. It's on all of the podcast platforms. You can follow me on Twitter, just Brad Kelly. Substack, also Brad Kelly-esque. That's my name, and then ESQUE.substack.com or whatever. And you can reach out to me for tarot readings. I do individual tarot readings over Google Meet. So you can find me on DM me on your favorite podcast or favorite social media, or email me at bradwkelly@gmail.com. Throw tarot in the subject line, so so it kind of gets through my filters. And yeah, well, let's see. Other than that, oh yeah, since you mentioned Andrew, I might as well promote this. I am on the paywalled side of Method Madness. I've been doing Q&A sessions, and I'm starting to bring guests in for that. In a couple of weeks, Andrew Edwards and I are going to do a kind of Q&A together. So if you're a paid subscriber to Andrew Edwards' Substack or Patreon, or my Substack or Patreon, you can ask a question. We're going to record a little episode directly responding to people's questions. I'm going to be doing one of those a month, hopefully bringing guests in for that as well. So yeah, check it out. I got a lot of stuff, man. So you'll find something that you like.
Yeah, you are pretty prolific, and I think that is. But I think that's a great. I think that you're being expansive in the universe, like we discussed. I think that's the right move. We want to flow with the Aeon. So I just want to say thank you again, Brad. Of course, you're welcome back on. I will invite you back on very soon, and we'll discuss something and very cool, I'm sure. And and so I look forward to it, and have a great evening. Thank you so much.
You too. That's wonderful.